Good morning and welcome to my channel again. I've been sharing on these videos about coming to Jesus back about 30 some years ago for me and my beginning conversion and faith. And the reason I'm sharing these are for posterity or kids to watch, or for, as in my kids, or of course anybody who might be blessed by them. So I want to get right into something today, because I've been thinking about this. Doing these videos has brought me back to that time and brings up lots of memories, and it's kind of fun to actually tell the story about when you came to Christ, or what Jesus did for you in the beginning, or how you got to know him, because it refreshes things and gets you back to what really counts and what matters. And I was remembering that when I first found a Bible and started to read it in Alaska all the time, and reading, I focused primarily on the Gospels and the book of Acts, and also the red letters. And Jesus' words were particularly interesting to me, and I primarily wanted to know him more, who he was, what he had to say, and, because I had completely dismissed him for so many years that I would never even consider listening to anything about Jesus. I'm not sure why, but now looking back, I think it's because of spiritual powers and principalities that don't want us to. But one thing I noticed when I was reading through the Gospels over and over again was how Jesus behaved at funerals. And that was one of my favorite aspects of Jesus, besides his compassion toward lost people who would come to him crying on their knees. There was the families who were in the midst of a funeral situation when he showed up on the scene. So here I'm going to read to you a little bit out of Luke chapter 7, verse 11. Sorry about the lighting. I don't know why it keeps doing that. Soon afterwards, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went along with him. As he approached the town gate, a dead person was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a large crowd from the town was with her. And when the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her, and he said, "Don't cry." And then he went up and touched the casket they were carrying him on. And the pallbearers, stood still, and he said, "Young man, I say to you, get up." And the dead man sat up and began to talk. And Jesus gave him back to his mother. And they were all filled with awe and praised God. "A great prophet has appeared among us," they said. "God has come to help his people." This news about Jesus appeared throughout Judea and the surrounding country. So that was one. There are several incidents like this where Jesus shows up at a funeral and basically raises the dead. And so for me, when I start to read the story and I see all these people in this procession and the pallbearers, I actually am very familiar with this scenario because I kept going through it as a kid. I kept going through these funerals and all the tradition and the sadness and the sort of routine that goes along with it. So much so that I used to, at the funeral home, where they used to do calling hours when I was young, they used to do calling hours for like 2 or 3 days, with like an afternoon calling hours and an evening calling hours, and then the next day afternoon calling hours and evening calling hours. And these calling hours were obviously the time when people could come and view the deceased and, comfort the survivors. But oftentimes there was open caskets. So when the first funeral that I ever went to as a kid, I was 5, I think, because my mother's father died. So my grandfather, and I still remember him a little bit today, even though I was very young. And funerals back then were like weddings. Everybody went. And weddings back then, too, everybody went. All the kids went, the babies went, everybody came. And there wasn't this separation or protect your child from death or anything like that. So I went to my grandpa's funeral when I was 5, and I saw him in the casket, open casket. And first time I saw a dead person. And then not too many, it might have been months, it might have been years later, I was very young again, and one of my favorite uncles died, my mother's sister's husband. And he was just a big sweetheart. And I was a little kid who was crazy about this guy too. And I went to that funeral and saw him as well, dead. And I don't remember having a lot of feelings about these things when I was little. It just was something that I did and saw, and I'm sure I was sad. I might have cried. And a lot of times a child cries watching other people cry. So if you're seeing your mom cry or your other aunts and uncles cry or other grown-ups cry, you kind of just get really sad or scared because of that too. So, like I said, I don't have a big, huge impression from those deaths. But of course, when my mother died, I was 12, and again, there was this 2 or 3 days of open casket, lots of visitors and people coming at this one particular funeral home, where all the funerals, like from hers and then my dad's and then my brother's, they all took place at this same funeral home in a small town. And it became very familiar. So I would show people where the smoking room was, and I tried to make people feel less uncomfortable, because I became more comfortable being at a funeral home than most normal people, because it just kept happening. And I was very young, so I think you're a little bit flexible when you're young. And anyway, so I was very familiar with just being, it's almost as if I worked in a funeral home, because I just was there so often, it seemed, throughout these years between the time I was 12 and 16. It was just seemed like funeral after funeral, and they went on for days. And then besides doing these 3-day calling hours, then you would also go to the church, and everybody, the procession and all the cars, and the family members would be like in a limo, and all these vehicles. The hearse was in front of us, or maybe we weren't a limo. I can't remember honestly, but the hearse was in front of us, and we were the first car behind the hearse. Which, once it got to the church where the service was going to be, then you had all these pallbearers, which I'm not sure if they were my brothers or who did this job, but how sad. Obviously people very close to the person who died. So the pallbearers would carry the casket into the church, and they put it in the designated place, which was right up front. And then you do the service, and then the pallbearers would get up again and carry the casket back out to the car. And again, many people who've lived on the planet long at all have been through these things. But like I said, to me, it was very, very familiar. It became, oh, here we go again. And then after they brought the hearse back into the car, then they would drive it to the cemetery, and which was another whole service kind of thing. And then they'd have the tent over the hole in the ground, or they had the little thing that covered the hole in the ground, because I guess they don't want people to be sad looking at the hole in the ground. I'm not sure why. There's all this pomp and splendor surrounding the entire thing. But when I started reading Luke, about 12 years later, and I'm reading the Gospels, and I see Jesus walking into this town where there's a whole funeral procession, I can picture these people, and I can picture the pallbearers, and I can feel the heaviness, and I can see that this person was very popular, and there was a lot of people around. And I can see where Jesus and his disciples may have been sort of just standing back and seeing this whole thing and watching, and then just approaching the woman, and the whole procession stopping. I mean, obviously they must have had some idea who he was, because you don't normally interrupt these things. They've got a very precise kind of schedule that they're on, but Jesus just kind of walked up to her. And I'm guessing, like I said, that some of these people might have known who he was, or enough to know to just be still for a minute. And I don't believe that they would have been expecting what was about to happen at all, though. I don't. And so when he gets done comforting her and touches the casket, and this kid, and he may not have been a kid, he might have been a grown man, says it was her only son. I kind of picture a teenager, because we're an early 20-year-old, because that's how old my brothers were. And so I picture this young guy kind of just sitting up, surprised, and giving back to his mother. And to read these words and believe them, which is what happened to me in Alaska. Like, I'm through all these funerals, nothing like this has ever happened at one of the funerals I was at. Nobody showed up and raised the dead. nothing supernatural and exciting and comforting happened. It was just pretty gloomy, awful. And here this was like turned into after the shock of the fact that he's alive and talking, they started to glorify God and say, wow, he's visited his people. And I'm thinking these people were probably cheering and just like hugging and oh my gosh, and just, overwhelmed. And that was part of the reason I like Jesus, because I read that and I believed that, and I thought that is a really cool way to handle a funeral. And I like the way my Lord handles funerals. And so I wanted to share that because that was one of the strongest draws for me when I was reading the Gospels. And that's probably enough for today. And I'll come back tomorrow or sometime soon, with the continuation of going to church with my friend in Alaska, and some interesting experiences with the Holy Spirit and things, and how divisive that can be very divisive. So, fun stuff. Thanks for listening. Bye.